I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. We are a little over 24 hours away from the NFL Draft. So, Evan, this is it, man. This is the yearly Cannon Fire Podcast mock draft episode. Excited to get into some more potential game day scenarios, draft day scenarios for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because after the draft this week, we kind of get back into the dark ages here. It's going to be a quiet couple of months until OTAs and eventually training camp will come back around.
Yeah, I mean, after the draft, you mentioned game day scenarios. After the draft, that's the next time we're going to be talking about scenarios pretty much is when they're playing a preseason game. Because, yeah, you go into the dark void of May and June, basically, because those 2 months, I think, are probably the deadest period in the entire league year. May and June, there's just not much going on. So we will have some content out for you guys between that. It's not like this is our last show until then, but yeah, it is exciting though. But it is this is kind of the last big thing. And I was actually talking, I don't remember, it might have been James I was talking to somebody though. My conversations with him are easily forgettable, but and he mentioned something about free agency, and I was like, the draft, I would argue that to me the draft's bigger than free agency. I mean, it's a whole spectacle. It's an event that they turn into. It's 3 days and it's gonna dominate the TV ratings. The NBA and NHL playoffs are on right now, and the draft, the commissioner reading off college kids' names are going to beat the ratings of playoff games for those leagues. It just is. So the draft is always special, and really, really excited to get into this. Now, obviously, a few disclaimers. It's a 3-round mock. It's a Bucs only 3-round mock. The first round will be more so what I think will happen, because I did do a first round mock draft for the entire first round. But the rounds 2 and their 2 third-round picks will be based on what I did when I ran the simulation. I did not sit there and map out every single pick, so I picked who was available when they were available. I did try to keep it realistic. There are some guys available maybe in the second round that I was like, I don't know if he'll be there, so I did try and keep it a little bit realistic. But yeah, we'll jump right into it.
All right, let's do it. So we'll open it up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers first-round pick, opening up shop with pick number 26 in. Again, this is real estate that I don't want to say was recently uncharted territory for the Bucs, because they had a lot of draft picks after the 20th here in the last couple of years. But you're getting into the later in the first round, so I feel like there's a little bit more strategy to ultimately deciding some of the guys who are going to be on your big board. Luckily, the position needs for the Bucs, they're not drafting a quarterback this year in the first round, so that's going to help out. But what do you think of the Buccaneers here at 26 to kick off the mock draft?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, they have a lot of options, right? And we've talked about those options. I'm not really going to go over every single option again, because like I said, if you want to do that, you can head to our last episode, which we discussed, pretty much 4 or 5 main guys that, we think could be available at 26 overall. And it's tough to predict exactly who's going to be available, right? Because you have 25 picks ahead of you. A lot can happen in those 25 picks. So it's not as easy, if the Buccaneers are picking 8th, it's a lot easier to pinpoint who's going to be there probably, right? When you get that late in the draft, though, there's a lot of unpredictability, and teams have certain players in certain spots, and one team could have a player 10th on their board, another team could have that player 50th on their board. It's really subjective. So with that being said, I will indeed do the NFL mock draft Buccaneers edition, 3 rounds, 26th overall pick. I had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting Chop Robinson, edge defender from Penn State. I have the Buccaneers passing on Jackson Powers Johnson. I do not have Jackson Powers Johnson in the first round. I think he is going to be one of the first picks on day two, but I do not have him in the first round. There's a few reasons for this. One, the positional value, I guess you could say, of a center, right? I think there's been since 2014, I think there's been 11 centers drafted in the first round, I believe. I believe there's been either 10 or 11 centers drafted in the first round. And that's in 10 years, right? That's a lot of picks. That's what 320 picks. There's only been 10 centers. So, I think the value there. Now, I will say that value a lot of times to me, like, okay, but like, is Jackson Powers Johnson the best player there? Like, to me, like that should trump value at certain points, right? At certain times, especially when look like the Buccaneers, they have a need at center, like they have a need at center. But at the same time, this class actually has some depth at center. They do have a little bit of depth at center where the Buccaneers, like they have in the past, could target a interior guy on day two. Round two, they have 2 third round picks now, a little bit more flexibility there. So I do think if they're going to pick an interior guy, it's more likely on day two, which we've seen Jason Light's, history with the draft. He likes to do that a lot, right? They picked Cody Malk last year, Luke Gedeke the year before that. So they do like to grab those offensive linemen typically on day two of the draft. But let me talk about the player that I had the Buccaneers picking, right? Not the player that I didn't have the Bucs taking, the player that I had the Buccaneers selecting. Chop Robinson. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people that don't like it. There's going to be a few people that are open to it. There's going to be people that are wait and see. There's going to be a few people that love it. That's to me how Chop Robinson is as a prospect. I think he's really boomer bust. I really do. To me, like I said, it's a guy who is going to get you 4 sacks a year, and he's going to be like not, his fifth-year option not picked up, or he's going to be a guy who 3 years time is going to be a dynamic pass rusher and is going to be able to get you 10 plus sacks a season. Like I think I mentioned this on last week's episode, but I mean, I wouldn't expect him to get you, TJ Watt and Myles Garrett level numbers. Like I'm not expecting that out of Chop Robinson, but I do think he's a guy that can get you in that, 10 to 14 range year after year if he hits his full potential. So he's a fun player, obviously athletic, as heck. Can really run as we saw at the combine. Really, a speed guy, but that's the risk with speed guys, right? A lot of times they'll get run off the ball, or look, in the NFL, man, everything's 2 times as fast, right? So your speed may work well in college, but it might not work against NFL level talent. And it worked well in college because his pressure ratings and his everything was good, right? Those numbers were good, but the sack production wasn't quite there. So I believe he only had about 11 sacks, I think, total in his whole career in college, which isn't great. But I did actually find something interesting that I believe J.C. Cornell, who is sort of a Bucs Twitter being, I guess you could say, he actually brought up a pretty interesting point to me when discussing Chop Robinson, because I believe he had the Buccaneers also selecting Chop Robinson, and what's interesting to me is that it's sort of becoming a trend here. I think Benjamin Albright had the Bucs taking Chop Robinson.
Yeah,
I know ESPN's place had them taking Chop Robinson.
He's become
but
a popular pick lately, I have noticed.
Yeah.
And for a while he wasn't. I'd say like the last week or two, more and more people have started to pile on into the fact that does he seem like the most likely pick for the Bucs at 26 right now?
I mean, assuming there's nobody unexpected there, right? Like if Jared Verse is there, I think that might change. If Latu's there, I think it might change. If Graham Barton is maybe there, I think it might change. I would say probably. I mean, I still, I actually have Kool-Aid McKinstry and Jackson Powers Johnson still on the board when the Buccaneers are selecting Chop Robinson. So yeah, I would say probably at this point. But like I said, anything can happen on draft night. Anybody can be there, but barring anything unexpected, I would say probably. But JC brought up a good point. He said many people say Chop Robinson needs solid coaching to find his elite ceiling as a pass rusher. who better than Buccaneers outside linebackers coach George Edwards, who helped convert Micah Parsons from an inside linebacker to one of the most dominant edge rushers in the NFL. And this was the interesting point to me. That not much so that first point. This was the one that really, really like sort of ran home with me. Edwards also coached Danielle Hunter in Minnesota. Hunter only produced 1.5 sacks in his last season at LSU. The year prior, he had 3 sacks in his sophomore year, and he turned Hunter into a double-digit sack artist in the NFL. So that's sort of a similar profile, right? A guy who in college did not have the sack production, had a lot of tools, didn't have the sack production, and George Edwards was able to help him. Now, it wasn't just George Edwards. It's not like having George Edwards on the staff is going to make Chop Robinson, Micah Parsons or Danielle Hunter. There's a lot of things that have to go into making him a player like that. But I do think it provides some optimism, right? That maybe, I think Chop is a guy who needs to go to the right spot. Maybe Tampa Bay is sort of the perfect spot for him. So I think it makes a lot of sense. The Buccaneers, I do believe, are going to be looking at Chop. I know there was actually a little bit of pushback on one of the videos we did on Jackson Powers Johnson, where people were just believing that he was not going to be available. Like, oh, why are we talking about him? He's not going to be there. He's not going to be there. I, with some people I've spoken to, I texted some people, and I don't know how the Buccaneers feel about him. I didn't really ask specifically on that, but just asked about his stock, and wouldn't shock me if he's a second round pick. If the Buccaneers want him, I think they'll be able to take him at 26. I don't think they'll have any issues there. Could he go? Sure. I guess it could be a smokescreen, but if he does go, I think it's like maybe 1 or 2 picks before the Bucs pick. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to be long gone. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, Chop Robinson to the Buccaneers at 26 overall. Your thoughts?
Yeah, regarding the Chop Robinson pick, we talked at length last week on the show about Chop Robinson, about how he's my favorite edge rusher the Bucs have on the table. I know Latu is kind of one of those guys you don't really expect to be there at 26. So Chop Robinson may be the next best option. But that boom or bust ability and finding a coach that can harness that is something that I think we gave Todd Bowles a lot of credit for last week on the show as well. So I like it, but, and this is just more so about the JPJ pick, I like a center. I totally understand the discussion about, we could find better value at different positions later in the draft, right? But, I mean, would you not say that JPJ is the best center in the class?
Oh, yeah, no, he definitely is.
Right, so you can solve a problem, and it makes a lot of sense for the Bucs to pick him up at 26 if he's available. He's a plug-and-play week 1 starter. I don't know how much better it can get than that. Chop Robinson, if you draft him, what kind of reps is he going to get the first 6 weeks of the season? How much playing time is he going to get on the defensive side of the ball? How are they going to be able to work him into that pass rush system? Because now you got a couple of dogs down there. You got Yaya Diaby, who, again, people are expecting to flourish. I assume if you take an edge rusher here in the first round, he's going to be taking mostly snaps from Joe Tryon-Shoyinka at this point. But still, you have a couple of guys there along the defensive line where the room isn't going to get crowded, because I'm not going to be upset with anybody on the Bucs board. I'm not upset. I like the position that they're in right now with what position prospects they have available on their board, but I do like the center pick. I do like JPJ. I'm a truther on that guy. I like him a lot, but if we're going defense, I think the next best thing is Chop Robinson. But again, I don't hate the position the Bucs are in, and I don't really hate anyone on the board right now.
Yeah, I think they're in a decent spot, because I say decent and not great just because I do think, they're a little late for the Latu, Jared Verse, sort of the premier edge rushers of this class. I think they're a little too late for those guys. It wouldn't shock me if one of them are available, and I've seen a few mocks that have had, one of those guys available and going to the Buccaneers 26. Like, it would not be out of this world shocking, if that were to happen. I just don't really think it's likely. So, yeah, I mean, they're in a decent spot because while they will be missing out most likely on those top guys, there still is going to be some depth, there at, Chop Robinson being there. I know Demarius Robinson's there. There's a couple other edge guys that could be available if the Buccaneers chose to go that route. Jackson Powers Johnson, obviously, Kool-Aid McKinstry, if they want to go in the secondary, most likely going to be available. So yeah, they are in a decent spot to get somebody at a need that they do, would value to.
Well, let me ask you too, just because I have started to see his name pop up a lot more in these media circles and these mock drafts and some of these draft day scenarios for the Bucs, and that is Johnny Newton, an interior defensive lineman from Illinois. So what do you think of Newton? And this is a guy that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about here on the podcast, but again, over these last couple of weeks to months, he's started to pop up, and I think more and more people also are starting to buy into the possibility of the Bucs going interior defensive lineman in the first round for potentially the third year in a row.
Yeah, yeah. So, the thing about Johnny Newton, his tape screams like top 15, top 10 talent. I believe there might be some injury concerns, which also there might be a little bit of concussion concerns with Jackson Powers Johnson. That may be a reason he's dropping a little bit. I think some teams are maybe a little bit scared of that. We all saw, obviously, Ali Marpet retired early. Like a lot of people, more players are, I think, Luke Kuechly retired after having multiple concussions. Like, I think players nowadays are a little bit more conscious, of that. They're cautious. They think about that stuff more. So I think teams are sort of thinking about that when it comes to JPJ. But Johnny Newton, I mean, like I said, with the tape, it's really good tape. I've seen some people question about whether he's a Bucs fit because, like you said, they draft Logan Hall, technically not in the first round, technically, first pick of the second round. Then they draft Elijah Cansey, and then they would draft Johnny Newton. Like you said, technically a third straight year where their first pick is an interior defensive lineman. And he's also kind of undersized for his position. But at the same time, look, like, he's the best player available. He's the best player available. I've seen some people don't believe he's going to be available at 26. There's some people that could think he's going to be a day 2 pick. It's sort of all over the board when it comes to him, but I that's how I look at it, right? If he's the best player there, look, like, he's going to be able to help you. And do I think you need an edge rusher more than an interior guy? Yes, I definitely do. I think you could be much more beneficial to having an edge rusher. But let's say, Verse and Latu are gone, like, I wouldn't be opposed to drafting Newton, over a guy like Chop Robinson, right? So because, again, the tape don't lie to me, and yes, the injury concerns, and I'm not a doctor, and I don't have team doctors there, but so I don't know all the information that these NFL teams do, but I think I'd be willing to to take the risk, because I think if all pans out, you could have quite the interior there with Elijah Cansey, Vita Vea, and Johnny Newton there. So we'll have to wait and see on him. But I would say, he's a dark horse for the Buccaneers for sure.
Before we get into round number 2, I wanted to kind of ask you, never say never. We know that the NFL draft has always been full of shocking moments. We've seen shocking trades over the last couple of years. So you never really know for sure. But if you had to take a stab at it, before we move on to round number 2, there's been a lot of mock drafts. A lot of people releasing their mock draft V24, version 8. Hopefully I got it right this time. But yeah, I'm sure that you've seen a lot of those mock drafts. Are there any players or positions that you can look at and solemnly say, like, absolutely not? Have you seen a couple of these mock drafts where you can basically just say, listen, like, there's not a scenario where the Bucs end up with this player? Are there any guys that you feel that strongly about that definitely will not be a Buck that you have seen mentioned?
I mean, I mean, like Nate Wiggins, the corner from Clemson. I mean, he's athletic. He's very athletic. The athleticism is off the charts, but he really struggles to tackle. And I just don't know in a Todd Bowles defense if you're going to be able to survive if you can't tackle.
Yeah.
So Nate Wiggins would probably be one of the guys that I would say, especially like I've seen them pass on I've seen them pass on like Kool-Aid McKitchery or Jackson Powers Johnson or Chop Robinson, or like I've seen them pass on those guys for Nate Wiggins. I'm just like, like, no, I'd chill on that.
Yeah, and the Bucs, I don't want to say they have a history of passing on defensive backs, but they kind of do. People cried about the Derwin James pick for years, but I remember, 2019, passing on Greedy Williams at the cornerback spot. He ends up going to Cleveland and is an afterthought now. I don't hear a whole lot about Greedy Williams now in the NFL. So just curious to hear your take, because, again, I know that this time of year, it's like everyone's got a mock draft, everyone wants you to see it, and everyone believes that theirs is correct no matter what. So, interesting some situations that you see people come up with. But let's get into day 2, round 2 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chop Robinson, the pick at number 26 here in the CFP mock draft for 2024. Evan, what have you got for day 2?
Yeah, now obviously a disclaimer, and this is for the entire all 4 of the picks here. This is what I think. Okay, this is not exactly 150% what I would do. This is a predictive piece here. Chop Robinson, I predicted the first round of the draft, so Chop Robinson was there. I predicted the Buccaneers would take him. This one, I did the PFF simulator 3 rounds, and this is who it gave me. Okay, I picked who was available. So again, there was a few times, like I think I said earlier, like it was a little bit unrealistic. I was like, I don't really think this guy will be there, so I didn't take him. But there's a few guys that I do believe would be there, and I did take them. So with the 57th overall pick, second round, the Buccaneers' first pick of day 2, I had the Buccaneers selecting Malachi Corley, the wide receiver from Western Kentucky. Corley was a guy who, at the beginning of the process, was like a kind of probably a third round pick, maybe an early day 3 pick, but has quickly risen up draft boards. And I believe the Buccaneers are interested in him. The second round might be a little high, but if they really want him, you're probably going to have to take him here, or else you're probably not going to get him in the third round. So basically, he's a lot like, I'm not saying he's going to be this player. I'm not saying he's turning into this player, but he's a lot like Deebo Samuel. He actually did play running back early on in his career in college, switched to wide receiver. So if you want like a Deebo Samuel light, like I think teams are trying to find that type of guy who can do a lot of different things that Debo can do. I think Malachi Corley might be the best bet in this draft. And I do think the Buccaneers have an interest in him. Why wide receiver this early? I do expect the Buccaneers to pick a wide receiver within the first 4 rounds. And honestly, I think it might be likely within the first 3 rounds, especially with that extra third round pick. Chris Godwin is entering a contract here. Mike Evans, yes, he just signed a 2-year extension, but he's also getting older. Like you have to start planning for the future a little bit. What if Chris Godwin doesn't re-sign? You have to start planning for these things. So Trey Palmer had a great rookie season, but to me, it wasn't so good that I'm going to pass up on a talented player, like Malachi Corley. If I think it can make my offense better, and essentially, like Liam Cohen's going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So Corley's going to play a lot. Trey Palmer's going to play a lot too. Will it be reduced? Sure. But, Malachi Corley is essentially going to be a starter. So I think that's why the Buccaneers make this pick here. Like I said, would it be a little rich for them? Wide receiver 57, maybe. I think in a perfect world, they'd probably pick one at round 3. But with how the board fell, I didn't really feel much comfortable with anybody else in round 2. So I think they would go with Malachi Corley.
Yeah, I agree on the reason why they would take an approach on wide receiver, and we had talked about a couple of prospects before that the Buccaneers could look to at the skill positions, because in the first 3-4 rounds, I'm still all about the trenches. I'm expecting an offensive lineman, I'm expecting an edge rusher, maybe an interior defensive lineman, but I wasn't expecting very many skill guys to be high up on the board. But in this situation, you talk about the possibility of moving on from Chris Godwin. You talk about how he's getting a little bit older and there isn't a chance he could re-sign. One of the guys that we had talked about was running back out of Kentucky, Ray Davis. And I know that, he's, again, another one of those sexy picks. As a Florida Gators fan, it was unfortunate having to watch him do what he did to the Gators defense last year, probably one of his best career games. But I started to get the sense more as we talked about potential running backs for the Bucs. I'm like, man, if they go offense here in the first couple of rounds, if it's a skill position, it definitely feels like wide receiver is going to be a bigger need. I know Rachaad White's not going to be here forever, but you still got, what, 2 more years of the guy, I believe.
Mhm.
So it's not an issue the Bucs have to address tomorrow, literally, or the next day. I think wide receiver may potentially be an issue that they're going to have to address sooner than later, and I think they're going to want to address it here in the draft early. So I like that pick a lot. Not what I expected you to do there in the second round, but like you said, you're kind of just given what the board, you're kind of taking what the board gives you, and that's what was left at that point. But good pick. I like it.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, you might get an interior guy, interior offensive line guy at that spot. But again, I don't remember exactly who's on the board. I just remember there wasn't any interior offensive line guys that like I felt comfortable taking at that spot. So figured why not just take the wide receiver. Now round 3 this is their one of 2 third-round picks. So this is number 89 overall. I have the Buccaneers selecting Marshawn Lloyd, running back out of USC. We just talked about running back. I do think this is a little bit early for me for Ray Davis. I know he's been a popular name because of the Kentucky connection with Liam Cohen. It makes sense. But I think Marshawn Lloyd, is a guy with a lot of speed. I wouldn't say game-breaking speed, but he's a pretty fast player. Nice change of pace back, I think, from Rachaad White. They did re-sign Chase Edmonds, but I don't think re-signing Chase Edmonds should stop you from drafting a talented running back like this. And also the one thing I do like about Marshawn Lloyd is he can pass block. He takes pride in that pass protection. I think that's a big thing. It's going to be a big deal in Liam Cohen's offense. So that's something that the Bucs and Jason Light have looked for a long time in their running backs. If you can pass block. So I think Marshawn Lloyd makes a lot of sense. Like you mentioned, Rachaad White has 2 years left on his deal. And while I know a lot of Bucs fans like Rachaad White, he's a nice player. History has shown you that the league is more likely to let those players hit free agency and sign elsewhere than retain them, right? The Giants just let Saquon Barkley sign with the Eagles. The Cowboys just let Tony Pollard sign with the Titans. The Titans just let Derrick Henry sign with the Ravens. So the Bengals just traded Joe Mixon to the Texans. So history has shown you that running backs often are going to change teams. And I don't think there's any guarantee that after the 2 years, Rachaad White is suddenly going to re-sign with the Buccaneers. So I think having Marshawn Lloyd there is just okay, Rachaad, thanks for the 4 years, but we got a guy here, right? I think it could be some nice insurance for him while providing value this year, right? He wouldn't play a starter's role. But providing a little bit of value this year as a role in this offense. But then I think the value comes a year or 2 from now when Marshawn Lloyd could be the lead running back. So I do have the Buccaneers again. I did remember that I did have a third round pick 3 picks later. So I did have that in mind as well. There's a few guys on the board that I was like, oh, I'd probably take him over it. But I was like, all right, let me see if I can still get this guy. So I did go with the running back there at 89th overall.
Yeah, my initial reaction to that pick is that if you do not have another third rounder a couple of picks later, you're not taking a running back, or at least not there. That's my opinion. I was a little surprised to hear you say that, but again, factoring in the extra real estate the Buccaneers have, it's not a bad decision. And the pass blocking aspect of it as well. You had mentioned getting a running back and not making that more of a priority, but making sure you get a guy who can pass block, because God forbid the Bucs are in the same position that they were a couple of years ago, where Rachaad White was playing as a rookie. Leonard Fournette was very clearly on his way out. And then you had a guy like Keyshawn Vaughn literally just taking up roster space for 3 years. He couldn't really pass block when he got in the game, and he couldn't run the ball very well. So you're going to have to find someone, I think, who can kind of pick up the slack there, because as much improvement as Rachaad White showed in the 2023 season, I do think there were some weeks where his pass rush, his pass block, pass protect, he just needed some help.
Yeah, no, for sure. And he's really developed as a pass catcher. But I also think, the Bucs put a lot of Chase Edmonds, obviously he got hurt early and then he came back in, the Bucs put a lot of wear and tear on Rachaad White's wheels, man, and I think actually adding a running back that can do like some real damage could be beneficial to Rachaad White. It could keep him fresher down the stretch. When you play that December football, when you go into, I know Rachaad White had a good game at Lambeau, but when you go into Lambeau in December and it's cold, like it could be a little bit easier, if your body's not as banged up. So taking Marshawn Lloyd there, I know there's going to be some people that groan at back-to-back picks being a wide receiver or running back, right? Because it's not obvious needs for the team. And I get it. But again, I sort of, I can only do what the board tells me. And that's how the board fell. And I just felt like picking Marshawn Lloyd there was probably the best thing for me at that point.
Yeah, I like it.
So moving on, the final pick of the 3-round Bucs mock draft. And then, like I said, I will do my top 10 for the whole draft. Just, really quick wrapping up. But my final pick, it's 92nd overall. And this is a Jason Light pick here to a T. If this guy isn't a Buck, assuming they don't draft an interior guy earlier, I would be, I don't have any intel. This is gut feeling and like knowing what Jason Light likes, but Mason McCormick, the guard from South Dakota State, I have him 92nd overall to the Bucs here. This guy's a project, obviously, but he is nasty. Like I said, he's a Jason Light type guard, type draft pick from a small school. The guys he likes to take on day 2. I think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, not taking Jackson Powers-Johnson in the first round, picking a wide receiver, picking a running back. You haven't addressed guard or center yet in the draft. I think they addressed guard right here. They still don't really have a penciled-in starter for left guard, so I think McCormick could come in right away and maybe not be a starter, but I think he'd at least compete, to be that starter at left guard. So I don't really see center as his future. I don't think that's a possibility. I think it's more likely guard, but I do think Mason McCormick, while not a finished product, to me, he just screams like a Jason Light draft pick.
Yeah, I definitely like his mentality. I like what he can bring to the offensive line. But you talk about that battle at guard, and in the first round, we went Chop Robinson, haven't taken a center. So it doesn't seem like they're going to find a starting center through the draft in this scenario in particular. You talk about another guy for the guard battle, Sua Opeta obviously going to be involved as well, and some other guys. But where does that leave the center position? Is it going to be Robert Hainsey battling with someone else? Is it, are we potentially looking at Robert Hainsey being your starting center for a third year in a row here?
So I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I had one bonus prediction for everybody here that has nothing to do with the draft. My prediction is that shortly after the draft, we will, and this isn't sourced at all. This is nothing. This is just a pure guess. If this plays out this way, obviously they draft Jackson Powers-Johnson, that obviously settles that. But my prediction that after the draft, sometime in May or June, the Buccaneers are going to sign Brian Allen, the former Rams center who worked with Liam Cohen in LA, has been injured on and off, and I think he's going to be brought in. He probably, by this point, be able to be brought in pretty cheap. I know he's been brought up as a fit for the Buccaneers. Right when free agency opened, he was brought up as a fit for the Buccaneers, and I think he'd probably be fairly cheap at this point. So I do think if they don't address center in the draft, specifically early, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see them kick the tires on a guy like Brian Allen to at least come in and compete with Robert Hainsey.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to have to do something, because if you go into training camp and it's just Robert Hainsey and a couple of dudes, I don't love that. Here we are talking about mock drafts and talking about what the Bucs are potentially going to do in the first round, and a center is one of the positions at the top of the big board, because unfortunately, Big Bob Hainsey just hasn't been enough. And you got to get another guy in the mix. We know that Robert Hainsey has I guess found a place for a former third-round pick here along the Bucs offensive line. He's been a 2-year starter, but with the addition of another center, does he become just a backup center at that point? I know we had kind of had the discussion a couple of months ago about him potentially moving back to guard, but there's some other people that say like that's not going to happen. So if the Bucs go out, they get another center, or they draft their guy, here's the conversation once more before we wrap things up. Where does that leave Bob Hainsey? Because he is, I don't want to say the odd man out, but if nobody expects you to be a starting guard and the Bucs go out and they acquire a starting center, then he's just kind of left there.
Yeah, I just, I think he'd just be a good depth piece. And there's nothing wrong with that to me. It's a depth piece who was a starter for you for 2 years. Obviously a former third round pick, just like you mentioned. And like I don't think there's anything wrong with that, I don't think, to me that would be a positive. To me, I would look at it as I have pretty strong depth, along my interior there because I have a guy like Robert Hainsey. So I understand in an ideal world, yeah, Hainsey plays well this year, in 2023, and you're not really even thinking about a center. You're like, oh, all we need is a left guard because Hainsey's the center, right? In a perfect world, sure, but he didn't play as well. 2022 was decent. 2023 took a little bit of a step back. So, I would be perfectly content with just having Robert Hainsey on my bench, and if I need a pinch, people get hurt. It's football. So I would be perfectly fine with having Robert Hainsey come in and be able to. I mean, he can play both guard spots. He can play center. I would be perfectly fine having him off my bench.
All right, let's round off the 2024 CFP 3-round mock draft for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then we'll get into the top 10, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I want to hear. Well, I want to hear your grade on it on the 4 picks, and then I want to hear you guys in the comments, right? So just to recap it, we have 26th overall, Chop Robinson, the edge defender from Penn State. 57th overall, Malachi Corley, the wide receiver from Eastern Kentucky. 89th overall, Marshawn Lloyd, the running back from USC. And wrapping it up in 92nd overall, Mason McCormick, the guard from South Dakota State. So I want to hear your grade on it. And then also, everybody in the comment section below, I want to hear your grade. And just, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. I'm always down to hear feedback. I'm always curious to hear you guys' thoughts on these players. So
I'm gonna give it a B plus, and the reason I'll give it a B plus is just because of that center situation that we had talked about. I know everybody feels differently about the sake of the offensive line, but for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there has to be a personnel overhaul there on the interior of the offensive line. It's not going to be Robert Hainsey at center, and it's not going to be anybody on the roster, well, anybody that we had last year at left guard. I just don't see it playing out that way. So, I think when it comes to like going after a guard being your first interior offensive lineman, I'd rather get a center. I feel better about the pick being a center. I feel like you solve more problems for yourself getting a new center, getting a dominating center, getting a guy that you can expect to be a people mover. You can expect a nasty mentality there, because if it's not anyone in the draft at center, and it's not, the Rams guy that you had talked about signing in free agency shortly thereafter, I just don't know if there is a guy that the Bucs currently have that I would feel great about being a starting center. Robert Hainsey being your best option at a starting center as of right now doesn't sit well with me. So I would like a center, but I also understand that you took things as they were given to you. You did the simulator. Right. Certain guys were there, certain guys were not. I think the extra 3rd-round pick helps cushion the blow of taking a running back. I don't hate the pick because, again, we talked about Rachaad White's contract situation.
That's ultimately why I took it. If I didn't have that other 3rd-round pick, that's probably an interior offensive lineman. And also, if I didn't have that extra 3rd-round pick, that 2nd round might not be a wide receiver either. So I think that extra day 2 pick really helps, give you flexibility there.
Yeah, I totally understand. I would say my biggest thing, if you take Chop Robinson at 26, totally fine. But I would say as far as, the 3rd-round pick, either one of those, I'm taking a center. Jason Light definitely has had a knack for finding value on the offensive line there in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round in the past. He's got an eye for centers, and there's a lot of good center depth in this class. JPJ might be far and away the best center in the class, but it doesn't mean you can't find a legitimate starter in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round. So really that's the big thing I would change. But again, what helps your case is the extra 3rd-round pick the Bucs got from the Lions a couple of months ago.
Yeah, and the tough thing is we mentioned, every free agency and every draft. Look, you're not going to be able to fill every single need you have every offseason, right? You're just not. There's going to be no team in the NFL this year that says, man, we had 7 needs, and we checked off every single one of them. We feel great about everything we needed. That just not, you're gonna have to make some sacrifices, right? Like you're gonna have to try and work some things out. For the Buccaneers last year, they took a lot of chances on a young secondary. I mean, uh, their depth behind Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean was a lot of young players. That was the chance they were taking, right? Their depth behind Levante David and Devin White, a lot of young players. So like you take your chances there. You can't always get, everything you want. Like an inside linebacker was also something I was considering, on day 2 at some point. The board just didn't really fall that way for me. So, because I do obviously Levante David's getting older. I think it's sort of a year-to-year thing with him now, right? I think it's going to be any year now, right? That he's going to say, this is it, right? He's not going to be in the NFL for much longer. So I do think you have to start planning for life after Levante David. If KJ Britt doesn't do as well, would you like that sort of that safety blanket of the day 2 pick, at linebacker there? So, I like I said, you just can't fill every need in every offseason, but I think overall we're an exciting class. I think adding a wide receiver and a running back anytime you can add some skill position guys, I think it's going to get people excited. So I think Malachi Corley especially is a pretty fun player.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I think we've been able to get excited about a skill player the Bucs have drafted in the first 3 rounds. I believe your boy Sneak Vaughn was the last one, if memory serves correct. I can't remember the Bucs drafting any wide receivers that early, and aside from Keyshawn Vaughn, I can't remember any running backs they drafted that early, except for like Ronald Jones in the 2nd round.
So yeah, and the thing is, I actually saw something. I forget who tweeted it, but it was I think it was. I don't remember just how many wide receivers a team has taken since 2019, since like the 2019 draft. I think the Buccaneers were dead last.
Yeah.
So, but because when you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, like you kind of don't need it, right? So you're going to put your resources somewhere else. So like the Buccaneers have not put a lot of draft resources in the wide receiver group.
All of the receivers the Bucs have seemingly drafted in the last 5 or 6, 7 years were to be kick returners. I remember every single guy that we drafted. I don't know why his name is escaping me. North Texas, your boy.
Jalen Darden.
Yeah, when we drafted Jalen Darden, we were talking about, this kid's good. He could end up being in the stacked wide receiver room, but his ability as a returner is what we were talking about. And it seems like whenever the Bucs have made a jump to get a wide receiver these last several seasons, later on in the later rounds of the draft, it's always a returner guy. It's never a potential replacement for someone like Chris Godwin.
Yeah, well, they've tried it. Tyler Johnson, I think, might have been that type of guy.
Fair, I forgot about him. What, 3rd round?
Yeah, I think it was 5th.
Okay.
They draft all the wide receivers I love. So I like Tyler Johnson. I like Jalen Darden. I like Trey Palmer. They just do that. So I like Malachi Corley. So maybe I'll be 4 for 4, I guess there. But wide receiver makes sense. Really quick now, just to wrap up the show. Next time we talk to you guys, the Bucs will have made their selections. We'll be going over the entire draft. The entire Buccaneers draft. Not the entire draft as a whole.
That'd be a long show.
Yeah, that would be one long show. Get ready for a 6-hour stream, folks. So yeah, we will be talking about the Bucs draft, breaking it all down for you guys. But with that being said, I want to do a top 10. I'm not going to do the entire first round. You guys know I had the Buccaneers taking Chop Robinson at 26 overall. Just for reference sake, I will say I have the Seattle Seahawks picking Jared Verse at 16th overall. The Jacksonville Jaguars taking Graham Barton at 17th overall, and the Los Angeles Rams taking Latu at 19th overall. So sort of the popular names that you've seen for the Buccaneers. I wanted to say like where I had them at. So with that being said, first overall, Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams. We've talked about it. Like it's not,
yeah,
it's obvious.
Seems like a foregone conclusion,
yeah,
especially with the Fields move.
Yeah.
I
don't understand why, and I get it, but like I just don't understand why the Bears just like now can't come out and say, okay, well, we're taking Caleb Williams, and that's that. Like,
how much of a % chance do you think there is they could still bear this up?
0. The dude had dinner with ownership the other night. Like 0. He was the only prospect to have dinner Like zero.
That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? If they just change their mind and it's Drake May, the first
Yeah.
quarterback off the
Oh
board.
man, they're gonna roll the dice on another UNC quarterback, huh? Oh boy. But speaking of Drake May, that is not who I have the Commanders selecting. I have the Commanders at second overall selecting Jaden Daniels. I know that there's some scuttlebutt, right? I guess some rumblings are like, oh, maybe Jaden Daniels doesn't want to go to Washington. Like you hear that from time to time with prospects, right? And it never really causes a fuss, right? Besides the Eli Manning thing, when's the another time besides that you can name me that in the NFL draft it actually happened?
It's a lot more bark than bite. You know,
Right.
there's a lot of different techniques nowadays by all these agents and kids coming out of college to negotiate their value, to try and get those last minute smokescreen reports to drive the stock up. And, it doesn't always work. But I'm glad that we are about to get to pick number 3. I'm curious to hear what you have the Patriots doing, because I'm also curious to hear your 2 cents on the emergence of J.J. McCarthy. I don't know, 2 months ago, we were not talking about J.J. McCarthy being one of the first 2, 3, maybe 4 quarterbacks taken off of the board. In these last few weeks, he's become a very sexy pick among league circles, and New England is one of the teams that you hear people, Minnesota and New England, I think, are the 2 teams you hear people connecting him to the most.
I think they're going to consider JJ. I do think they'll consider him here. Ultimately, I do have them taking Drake May. I just think they're going to take the guy that probably has the higher ceiling. I think maybe JJ might have the higher floor. Like he might be a little bit safer. But I think Drake May makes a lot of sense for them. And I also think they're going to consider Marvin Harrison Jr. I really do. They have a high pick in the second round, the second pick in the second round. So if a guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. falls, you could have Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3, and then one of those quarterbacks there. So I think they'll consider him, but ultimately, I think they're going to take Drake May. I have the Cardinals staying at 4. I do not have them trading out. I have them taking Marvin Harrison Jr. I just think he's too good to pass up. I think it's going to take a lot for a team to move up and have the Cardinals move out of that spot. So I do have them selecting Marvin Harrison Jr. to pair with Kyler Murray.
I don't like to say can't miss pick, because whenever you start saying that about guys, you're going to eventually.
He might be the best player in the draft.
Dude, Marvin Harrison feels as close to a can't miss pick as we have had.
I'd be shocked if that guy was a bust.
Yeah.
Barring any injuries, right? Because you can't predict that. Assuming he stays healthy, right?
It is Arizona, so give him a little bit of a break. Nothing wrong with.
They had Fitzgerald there for how many years?
You're right.
They've had some wide receivers.
Nothing inherently wrong with Kyler Murray, but I don't know.
I'm telling you, it's starting to go the other way. I used to think Kyler Murray was overrated. I did. And now I think it's starting to turn far toward the extreme that I think he's underrated now.
Okay.
I do. I think people think Arizona needs a quarterback, and I don't get it.
Not so much underrated, overhated?
Maybe both. Maybe a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think he's a top 12 quarterback. I think Arizona could do much, much, much worse than Kyler Murray. And I think you saw that last year, Arizona, they were feisty early on in the year, but when Murray returned, they beat Philly in Philly. I know Philly was collapsing, but in Philly, that's a tough for a West Coast team to go into Philly and win. That's a tough game. And I thought Murray played pretty well last year. So I do like the fit there with Marvin Harrison Jr. Number 5.
Had some good games down the stretch nobody was talking about enough. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good. Number 5. I have the Minnesota Vikings moving up with the Los Angeles Chargers to select J.J. McCarthy, 5th overall. Yes, I do think that J.J. McCarthy is going to be the 4th quarterback off the board. Wouldn't shock me if he's the 3rd, but I would bet on him being the 4th, and I think the Vikings make that move. Post Kirk Cousins era, I think they're going to try and get their guy. There's a lot of pressure on their GM. He's got a heck of a name. I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but there's a lot of pressure on him to nail this. Or else, it could be his job on the line. So I think he's going to make a bold move, go basically, go big or go home. Right. So I think he's going to do that and get JJ McCarthy. 6th overall, I have the Giants selecting Malik Neighbors. As good as Marvin Harrison Jr. is, if Malik Neighbors was in any other class, he'd probably be wide receiver 1. And I honestly think yeah, Neighbors is wide receiver 2, but the gap isn't ginormous.
Right.
Like it's not like it's Marvin Harrison Jr. and then a bunch of dudes. Like Neighbors is really, really, really good. And I think the Giants land a guy here. I think they would consider, I think they would take Drake May. I think they would take Jane Daniels. I think they would consider JJ McCarthy. I'm not sure if they would pick him, but so I think they would consider a quarterback at this spot, but I do have them selecting Malik Neighbors instead, giving Daniel Jones a pretty nice weapon there.
Well, that's what I was actually going to bring up, and I know this isn't a Giants podcast, so we don't have to spend too much time into it, but if they don't get a quarterback there, does that mean that Daniel Jones is the guy for at least another year?
Yeah, probably. And then next year it's Shador. So, but anyways, 7 Tennessee Titans. I have them selecting Joe Alt. I did put some thought into a wide receiver here. I just think Tennessee has a young quarterback. I think you need to do whatever it takes to protect that young quarterback. Yeah, sure, the jury's still out on Levis, right? It's not like it's a CJ Stroud situation where oh yeah, this is the guy. You still don't know, but I think you got to give him the best opportunity possible. And I just think the Titans offensive line is not at the level it needs to be right now for Levis to have a shot. So I think Joe Alt, first tackle off the board, probably best tackle in the draft. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, second half of the season last year, they were playing with makeshift parts. You remember, how dominant the Buccaneers pass rush had of a day against the Titans because all of the guys, I think 4 out of 5 of their offensive linemen were not week 1 starters. It was a rough second half of the season for them.
Number 8, I have the Atlanta Falcons selecting Dallas Turner. Another team I think could go wide receiver, but I have my first defender off the board at number 8. The first 7 picks are all offensive players. It's going to be a remarkable offensive draft. Dallas Turner's really good, and like I said, he's the guy who I think I came on here, a couple weeks ago, and we're like, look, we can talk about Latu, you can talk about Verse and whatever. I was like, the dude that has no chance of being there is Dallas Turner. And look. It wouldn't shock me if this pick here at 8 was Latu, but I would lean towards Turner just because I think, especially in the top 10, picking a player like Latu with the injury history, I think is a massive gamble. Turner's much safer, and I think Atlanta will finally get an edge rusher that they've been searching for, especially now that, quarterback sort of, knocked off the board for now. They don't need to worry about that as much, so I think Dallas Turner makes sense. Number 9, Chicago. I have them selecting Byron Murphy, the second defensive lineman out of Texas. His stock has really risen over the last week or so. I do think he's going to be a pretty high draft pick at this point. And I think the Bears are going to follow the Texans blueprint of last year. The Texans picked CJ Stroud too, and then the Texans had the other first round pick and picked Will Anderson. So I think the Bears are going to pick the young quarterback and then pick the defensive lineman. I did, again, put thought into a wide receiver here because, just having DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and a Roma Dunze would be really crazy. But ultimately, I do think they decide on the trenches there. And then rounding it off with a bang with the New York Jets, the New York Jets, Jets. Listen, they should take a tackle. They player. They have Morgan Moses, good player, right? Both are older though, right? And Tyron Smith has not been the most reliable health-wise, so they should take a tackle. But they're going to take Brock Bowers. They're going to take Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia. If that offense stays healthy, I don't know how you're stopping it. Just Aaron Rodgers throwing to Brock Bowers, Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, pretty solid out of the backfield. Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses blocking, Elijah Vera Tucker on the interior. That's a very good offense if it stays healthy. If is a big word. If it is a major word. But I just think they probably should. A team building philosophy, you should take the tackle, right? But I just think they're gonna say screw it and we're gonna have fun, and I think it's gonna be Brock Bowers. So yeah, it's gonna be quite the pick, I think.
I think the Jets are the team that won the NFL uniform redesign sweepstakes for 2024 because there were a lot
I
of
got to
them.
give it to the Texans.
Texans were all right. I like the Texans.
I like the Lions too. The Broncos are the worst.
I like the originality of the Texans look. That I can appreciate because that's how you pull off a modern look well. I think the Broncos are an example of how you completely ruin and just delegitimize a uniform and a brand. Those look like XFL uniforms, and they do not look good. The Texans look good, but I got to give the nod to the Jets, and I guess the Lions as well, because I appreciate the appreciation that it seems like a lot of teams are starting to have for their classic looks, for the importance of a staple look in the league like the NFL. The Denver Broncos uniforms that they just unveiled do not look like uniforms that they are going to be wearing 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. I would like to hope not. It's not a great look. Those Jets uniforms, man, already pulling them back out of the past, embracing the stripes and the giant oversized numbers and the simplicity of it. One of the biggest upgrades in uniforms across the league. I thought the old Texans uniforms were fine. I can understand how they did feel dated, and again, I appreciate the new approach that they took, but I love that old school look that a lot of teams are starting to bring back. I thought the Bucs did it when they went back to their old traditional uniforms with the red and pewter back in 2020. I thought, the Lions did it when they announced their redesign. Like, those look good. I know they really didn't change anything massively, but the shoulder stripes and the number font makes all the difference in the world.
Oh, I mean, adding the black uniform.
Yeah, the black uniform might be one of the best alternates in the NFL. That's a great looking uniform.
It does seem a little Carolina Pantherish, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a lot better than the alternate uniform they rolled out last year. That thing was hideous with like the 1926 logo on the side of the helmet, the blue lid. I hated those. Hopefully those are dead and gone. But, the redesigns that we are starting to see, I think the era of uniforms that we are moving into, Arizona had a really good uniform upgrade as well. I think we are getting back on the right track when it comes to the aesthetic of the NFL, except for the Broncos and those UFL United Football League uniforms they just rolled out.
Yeah, hey, well, you can't get them all right? So
hey, listen, we've seen it before. Luckily, the Buccaneers only took 4 or 5 years to amend their mistake. It took them the bare minimum amount of time to say, hey, we really effed this up. Let's just go ahead and go back to what wasn't broken in the first place.
It's true. It is true. But yeah, that wraps up our draft show. Obviously, uniform talk, drafts of the draft show. But yeah, obviously stay tuned. Like I said, we will have post-draft coverage here on the channel. And just be tuned for that. But very excited, obviously.
You are going to be live throughout draft week. I don't know about on this channel, but kind of kicking yourself out wide, going to some other channels.
Yeah, I'm going to be live on James Hill's Mr. Bucks Nation. I don't know why I said James Hill's Mr. Bucks Nation, like it's a band.
The artist formerly known as Mr. Bucks Nation.
Right. I'm going to be live on his stream Friday night, and then a little bit, I think, Saturday. Saturday is not going to be very long because day 3 is... Look, I mean, probably going to bounce after the Bucs 4th round pick, to be honest with you. But I am planning, actually, with the short video content that we've been rolling out on this channel, I am planning to do kind of like, not instant, like initial, sort of, initial reaction to the Buccaneers, each Buccaneers selection. And I will have that. So once they pick Thursday night, I will do a video Thursday night, and you'll probably see it here Friday morning at some point. And then Friday, same deal. I'll go over their day 2 picks, and you'll probably see it Saturday morning. And then probably Saturday, I'll probably wait to do full recap, of the draft as our podcast. Probably at some point Monday or Tuesday, I would guess. And then who knows, we may have a couple special guests there to review it with us as well. So stay tuned for that.
Looking forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for this week's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and listening anywhere you get your podcast. We are on video over there, youtube.com/Cannon Fire Podcast. And you can listen with audio courtesy of our friends at the Believe Podcast Network, anywhere you download a podcast. Find the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. If the people want to get caught up for the draft, I know you've got your draft profiles for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but anything else you're working on or in the hopper over at BucsNation.com?
Yeah, so really quick to tune in, I believe tomorrow morning at some point. I don't know exactly when, but my full NFL mock draft for the first round will be up at bucksnation.com. So I know I gave you guys the top 10. Now you can see the rest of the picks. So and I explain a reasoning sort of with each pick as well. So really looking forward to that. And like I said, tune in if you're listening to this Thursday morning. Good chance it's already up. So head over to bucksnation.com right now and check it out and see how many picks I can get wrong in one night.
Last but not least, you can find myself, Instagram, and Twitter at Redicus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. But that's the show. We will talk to you guys this weekend as we recap the 2024 Tampa Bay Buccaneers NFL Draft Class. It is an exciting time of year and excited to see some new additions to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise. I'm your host, Rhett Matthews, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We'll talk to you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.